Hi, I'm Bei Song, and we're back in the Executive C-Suite. My guest today is Barak Ben-gal. He is, or was, the CFO of SunRun. Barak, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
For coming
Good to be here.
You quit your job just in time to make my introduction a little complicated and my interview barely legitimate. How dare you?
I'm sorry about that, but it's been a great summer.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I look forward to hearing about that afterwards. And you quit your job for a young lady.
I did. Her name
Yeah.
is Talia.
Yeah.
She's about 15 months old now, and I've been spending an awful lot of time with her this summer, watching her learning to walk and learn new words as she's talking.
That's a good excuse to quit working for a little while. We will let her play or fall asleep for a little while we talk about Daddy's career stuff.
Perfect.
Now, let's rewind, just take a quick snapshot of what you've done in the past few years before we go into your CFO experience.
Sure. When I left the GSB, I had actually, while I was here, I did the joint degree program. So I did the MBA, but I also did a master's in education. And coming out of that program, I was lucky enough to be selected for the Broad Residency in Urban Education. It's like a White House fellowship, except that it's in the education sector. I was placed into the Oakland Unified School District to be in their executive cabinet and to run their finances. The Oakland Unified School District had gone bankrupt at that time. And so coming out of business school, where I had only had strategy positions before then, all of a sudden I was running the finances of an $850 million bankrupt school district with 13 unions. So I did that for a number of years. Then we had a change of administration, and as with normal change of administrations, there's a change in the top-level staff, and so I left the school district and went to work for Yahoo, another organization that was looking at the time to do a transformation of itself. I went to run the change management office for the entire FP&A organization called Ops Finance. So that was, Yahoo's $8.5 billion, and the Ops Finance function was about 400 people across 27 countries. In 4 different continents, and so there were, I had to do a finance diagnostic and figure out the systems, the processes, the controls, to try and align all of those activities. I was working in the corporate function to which all the different business units report in order to get the forecasting done and allow top management to make business decisions based on the numbers. Yahoo was then, if you remember, Microsoft tried to buy Yahoo. Right. There was a large exodus of people, a brain drain, right. And so my boss actually moved to a company called Support.com. She became the CFO there, and I accepted a position as her controller. And I stayed there for 4 years, really reinventing a company. When I joined, we had a large enterprise software division, and I joined as part of the effort to sell off that particular division and start up a brand new, basically a startup within a public company that we grew from $1 million to over $60 million in the span of a couple of years, all while being publicly audited and having your quarterly earnings calls. And then when Talia, we started expecting Talia, I then left Support.com to become the CFO of SunRun. And that brings us up to where we are today.
While you were at Support, you actually had an opportunity to become a CFO, but you chose not to.
So you're correct that the Sunrun CFO opportunity was not my first opportunity to become a CFO, but it was the first one I'd accepted. The previous opportunity was when I was leaving Yahoo. I had worked with some of the recruiters, and there was just this amazing company that was backed by one of the best VCs, or a range of some of the best VCs. I loved the CEO. I met with him as well as with the board. The company had some Israeli R&D, so my background as a native Israeli who speaks the language was definitely helpful. And I loved the business model. And yet I turned down the opportunity. I actually was so junior in my career that I'd actually accepted. I let it get to a point where they gave me a written job offer. You should never get to a point if you're not going to accept something. If you're getting an offer, you should be accepting it. I got the job offer, and I didn't think that I should accept it. And it had nothing to do with the company or with the offer. The offer was an excellent offer. It had to do with me. When you typically talk about finance is in terms of having a forward view and a backwards view. The forward view is the FP&A. That stands for forecasting, planning, and analysis. The backwards view is all of your accounting. So it's recording the actual balances of what's actually happened. And the analogy that people tend to use is that you're driving a car, or maybe the CEO is driving the car, or whatever, but you're looking at your indicators, hence the dashboard. You're also trying to look forward to see where you're going, but you're not going to know where you're going unless you figure out where you've been, how fast you've come, and whether you've hit any bumps along the road, so maybe you have a flat tire. And my entire career until then, those all gave me the forward-looking aspect. And I had no practical experience. I'd worked very closely with accounting, and I'd never actually run an accounting department or worked in accounting nor managed it. And I talked to several of my mentors, and then I talked to the company who had given me this offer. The company, the CEO kept saying, just hire a great controller. You just need to be able to manage them. And it's true, most CEOs and most boards will look for somebody who has that forward-looking strategic outlook, because that's really what you're looking for in the CFO, is the strategic business partner to the CEO who's able to take a vision and take it, prioritize it, and execute on it by actually saying, okay, let's operationalize this vision, figure out what resources are needed. But you also have to manage, the CFO also has to manage the accounting function. Nobody else wants to know about it. Nobody else wants to hear about it. It's kind of like oxygen. Accounting is much less sexy, if you will, as far as any of the business school students or graduates who are looking at this, and I certainly was one of them. I'd never worked in accounting. I tried to get through the accounting classes as quickly as I could while I was at the GSB, and I want to get past those into the vision and the work that the CFO does. In fact, that entire finance organization is the responsibility of the CFO. And hiring a controller to take over that responsibility did not feel right to me, because I wouldn't even know whether that controller was a good controller or a bad controller. I didn't have a clue as to how do you actually manage a close cycle. What about the 10K? And I didn't know what I didn't know. Best decision I ever made was saying no to that company, as wonderful as they were. And that was actually what gave me the fortitude to accept the controllership position at support.com, where I ran all of the least sexy things you could imagine. The payroll, accounts payable, general accounting, the monthly close, revenue recognition, taxes, both payroll taxes and income taxes, all the things that you need to know about, all of the SEC reporting, so the 10Ks, the 10Qs, the 8Ks, all of these numbers that might not mean anything are critical. Because what I learned in that time was the importance of accounting in the general running of a business. I had to review every single major contract that came in. I had to understand what all the different disclosure requirements that the SEC requires that I didn't even know. Nobody ever tells you. You learn about them sort of on the job or in these boot camps. And I learned, it became such a critical part to the business that I was a critical part of business development, because accounting had to sign off on it before the CEO was allowed to sign off on it. Right. And I knew what were the things that I would have to disclose if you signed it now versus after I submitted my 10K. Everything from layoffs, restructurings, office, facility, whether you're signing a new lease or impairing an old one, whether you're signing warrants, how should you structure those, whether there's an actual number of warrants or a price for the warrants, things that actually matter to the business that you might not think had an accounting implication unless you'd actually worked in that. So I did that for 4 years, and then I felt ready to accept the CFO position because I had the FP&A background, and at this point I felt like I really filled in that skill set of the accounting. If you don't have any experience in accounting, you will make really junior mistakes, that are going to create some problems for you as the financial advisor to not just the CEO, but the entire management team. It's your responsibility to know it. you're in closet, in closed doors, you're in conference rooms, you're in all of these confidential conversations where you're not going to have the time to turn around and ask somebody, oh, is there something here that I need to disclose? You need to be familiar with it, and if you don't put in that time, it'll come back and bite you.
But then you decided to join Sunrun to become the CFO. So how did that come about? And how did, what made Sunrun decide to take you? Was it your name? Was it that the solar company needed some more love from the president?
I have actually met Barack Obama, I have to say, as an aside, and I shook his hand and I said, hey, from one Barack to another, I think you're doing a great job. And he thought that was pretty funny.
He probably doesn't get that very often.
No, he did not get that very often. And so the Sunrun opportunity came to be actually through a GSB connection. Okay. Sunrun is a phenomenal company. It was started by two GSBers who were actually at the GSB when they founded the company. Oh. And the first the first VC to fund it was actually a classmate of mine who believed in the idea. Okay. The CFO position had been open for 9 months before they ever came to me, because what they were looking for, they thought maybe they want somebody from the solar industry, maybe they wanted somebody from the financing industry, maybe somebody from utilities, but instead, each one of the people that they interviewed was not a great cultural fit. My background was quite diverse in terms of doing strategy for a high-tech company, and then working in the school district, and then working for an internet company, and then working for a channel-based consumer services organization, which is what Support.com was. So all of a sudden, to come into solar, I didn't have the industry background, but I had a proven track record of being a fast learner who was able to get up to speed quickly for large and fast-growing organizations that needed to pivot quickly. And so I came in to meet with first the executives, the co-founders, the two co-founders, and then with every single person on the executive team. And I just remember being very impressed by just the sharpness of the people on the team that I would be working with, and by the magnitude and the scope of the problem that they were taking on. It felt like it was a terrific opportunity. It was making a difference in the world, being able to take solar energy and make it available to all of the residential households. In addition to that, it felt like the right role at the right time for me. They were very understanding about my changing family situation. They were a private company as opposed to a public one, so I didn't have the quarterly earnings calls that were coming up. That's how the Sunrun opportunity came to be.
So now you're at Sunrun. What was your CFO mandate there in the context of that business? Right. And how did you, now that you have the back view ready, and I know you had the front view as well, but you still probably needed some onboarding for that particular job, right?
Correct. The mandate of a CFO is really broad. And what I mean by that, oftentimes people consider the CFO as being the finance guy, or actually the finance woman. Right? I worked every boss I've had until now has been a woman, and many of them have been CFOs. And so that, I think if you thought that as somebody wanting to go into the CFO track, you would be making a mistake and you'd be looking at the lens too narrowly. If you were a CEO looking to hire a CFO and you thought of them as just coming in and bringing the finance skill set, you would be missing out on potentially the most powerful ally that you have. The CFO's responsibility, if you're thinking about driving that car, you could argue that the CEO is the driver, or you could argue that the CEO is actually the passenger who tells you, who's navigating and telling you which way they want to go, but the CFO is the one who's actually measuring the performance, the dashboard, telling you, stepping on the gas or the brakes. And that analogy, of course, breaks down at some point depending on the size or the scope of the company. But the CFO is absolutely not just the person who's responsible for the financials. The entire finance organization fits under the CFO, as does risk management typically, unless you're a very large organization that has a separate risk function like in a finance organization. But risk mitigation is something that fits under legal and finance. The CFO is responsible for all of the forecasting function. So being able to understand all of the strategic initiatives that an organization has, being able to quantify both the expenses and the resources that are necessary in order to make those strategic initiatives happen, to execute on them, as well as the return. So the sales that are coming in, being able to measure those and to say, here's what we thought these were going to be. And so the dashboards typically come from the CFO's organization. And by that I mean the management dashboards that have everything on. You could talk about the balance scorecard or any other type of a scorecard that you're looking for. That's a critical part of the forward-looking. Cash management and treasury. So you can be GAAP profitable and yet be running out of cash. That's a JV mistake. So the treasury, cash management, investment functions are there. Clearly the accounting, all of the SEC reporting, investor relations, if you're both a private or a public company. But clearly if you're a public company, then part of the earnings call and the earnings call strategy and the follow-up, all of the proxies and the annual meetings is something you'd be doing with the general counsel. But oftentimes, and again, it depends on the type of organization you have, the CFO is actually responsible for the entire G&A organization. Mm-hmm. So I've seen organizations where the general counsel and HR report to the CFO. That goes in and out depending on the structure, but very frequently IT as well as facilities absolutely report to the CFO. So you've got a broad set of functions reporting to you, but the number one thing that you actually do is you're the person that the CEO comes up with these terrific visions. They want to be out there inspiring the company, inspiring the world, and setting the targets that are going to take the company and make it a huge success. Your job is to receive that vision, to say, that's great, but we're already juggling 24 different things. Here's what these things are going to cost. Let me help you prioritize it. And you're the one who goes into the CEO's office, closes the door, and behind closed doors has a real conversation with the CEO about what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, what are certain risk factors, not certain risk factors, what are elements that might need to be disclosed or not. Okay, that's the mandate of the CFO. What was it like at Sunrun? At Sunrun, I was the first CFO that the company's ever had. And part of the mandate then was educating the entire organization. You think about upward management, lateral management, and downward management as to what a CFO actually does. And there was just an awful lot of building from scratch, because if you have never had a CFO and there's never been somebody who's a finance person who's running the finance function, there will be gaps missing. It's just like if I try to run a function, if I try to run the sales function, there will be gaps missing because that's not my forte, that's not my background. And so I had to hire a controller, an assistant controller, a funds controller, FP&A director, a tax director. I mean, literally filling out my management team all the way down into some of the accounts payable clerks and the payroll function. So there was quite a lot of work to be done there, and quite a lot of work to be done on the process. So that's the people, then the process, everything around new business and how contracts were being signed, to how the forecast. There was no quarterly forecast. There was never there was not a quarterly business review that was being done. Again, because there was nobody really doing the measurement, the dashboard. Those were all pieces that I had to put in from a process perspective. And then, of course, there were the systems. And that has to do everything from, we had an ERP implementation that was put in shortly after I got there. That had been in progress for a year and a half before I ever came, but went live after I was there. And then, so that's on the ERP side. You needed a system for the taxes, needed another system for the FP&A. So there's a range of different elements, but all of those were my mandate. Mm-hmm. And then the next question you had asked was around onboarding. So you show up, you're the first CFO that the company's ever had. People don't know what to make of this beast.
And you have no one to ask.
You have no one to ask. Knowing what to do as a CFO is actually something that I knew what to do because I had worked so closely previously with the CFO. I'd seen enough of what CFOs need to do to be able to understand the role. That was not the issue. Really, it was about learning the organization and being able to set the right tone with an organization that had never known a CFO. And so some tips that I would give people when I accepted the offer, before I ever started, I came in and took the team out for dinner. It was like a happy hour and dinner, just to give them a chance to get to know me on a social basis. Then I had sent them all an email before I ever started and asked them to answer 3 questions, what do you do? What would you like to see done? And what should the team be improving? It was really simple things, but just asking them more about
them the opportunity
to give me feedback. And I asked them to all send me their resume so that I would know what they had done in the past. Because it's a big mistake that people make, is just by looking at someone who's doing a particular role now and assuming that that's the only thing that they know what to do.
Yeah.
So I then, before I ever showed up, I had my executive assistant schedule one-on-one meetings with every single one of the people on my team. And there was, I think it was something like 30 people on the team that I had to meet with for one-on-ones. And it didn't matter their level. I met with every single one of them so that I would know them by name and so that I would give them the opportunity to give me feedback. That was the first thing I did when I started. I also had set up one-on-ones with every single one of the executives. And the questions there were, how's your experience been with finance? How can I help? What's being done well? What's not being done well? What's not being done at all? And then I also did a range of, so that takes care of the employees in my function, my team. That takes care of the executive team, which is my peers. But what about the rest of the company? And the part that you forget when you come in is that you have a presence and visibility that the entire company really cares about. And so we ran a series of, I think it was about 3 different brown bag lunches. And they were called Meet the CFO. It was actually called Meet Barak. And then it said, not that one, ours. And I came in, the lunches were packed. We limited them. I think we started with 2, and then because they were packed, we ended up doing a 3rd one. And it was amazing, the people who came from every different department. I mean, people came from sales, people came from technology, people came from IT, people came from customer care, and they all had lots of questions. And it wasn't necessarily questions about, well, how are you going to recognize revenues on, this type of a contract? It was, what kind of background do you bring to this company? What's your vision? How do you run things? That kind, that sense of who is this person as a person. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing I did was I did a big lunch for my team to where they got a chance to ask me questions that they put together in advance, and it was all about my management. So do I prefer people to come by with a question, or would I rather they ask me an email, via email? What are my expectations of hours? Mm. What are, if I send them an email over a weekend, do I expect them to answer? Mm. It was all the things that they really care about but are afraid to ask, and it's all about work-life balance, really, is what you'd find out. It was all disguised. It came from the whole team. I had to answer it in front of the whole team. It was just a wonderful, positive experience, so that they knew I had a little baby girl, so I would have to catch the 5 o'clock bus to get home before the nanny left at 6, but I would be online every day from like 8 p.m. until midnight or something. So I will get to their questions on the same day. And if they need to talk to me, I could talk to them every single day from 5 to 6 or from 8 to 9, while I was on my commute. And that was great to establish that in advance. So those were the different things I did to get to know people. And then the one other thing that I highly, highly recommend, I think one of the strongest partnerships that you could have between, from finance to any other team, if you had to pick, you clearly need to be collaborative and work cross-functionally with every function. But the one function that I think most often is left out or most often is taken for granted is sales. Sales and business development. And so,
again, similar to accounting, which has not been highly respected among the MBA.
Among the MBA populations, it's true. Although many MBAs do go into business development, but very few of them go into sales.
Right.
Finance is oftentimes viewed, or accounting is often viewed as the no sales department, where the salespeople bring in the contracts and they have to get accounting approval or with the stamp, whether it's for revenue recognition, whether it's credit approval, whether it's special terms that need to be approved. Whatever it is, there's oftentimes a time pressure, time sensitivity. People are concerned about their quotas, and on the one side, and the accountants feel like Sales might be cutting corners. There's these perceptions of organizations that need to watch out for each other or be careful or with each other. And I was going to have none of that. And so the first thing I did was really make sure that I scoped out the sales and marketing department. Sales and business development at Sunrun were run by just an incredible man by the name of Bill Shu, who felt exactly the same way, and we had an incredibly strong partnership. And there was not a single, in the entire time I was there was not a single time when we did not see eye to eye. We certainly had things that bubbled up that we had to deal with. We always dealt with them in an aligned way, and a lot of that has to do with the effort that you put in at the beginning. In fact, one of the first things I did was take an entire week to go and do an onboarding, a customer onboarding. So the sales team has a training function that actually trains our channel partners, and I sent an email to the head of training and said, when's the next training? He said, well, it's coming up in 2 weeks, but it's a full week. You've got a lot of stuff to do. And I said, please sign me up, I'm there. And I put everything else on hold and flew out there, got to know not just the customer, but understand the training. I went door to door and knocked on doors and actually tried to do some of the sales to understand what the issues were. The resistance, it really helped me understand the challenges that the channel was experiencing, and it really gave me insight as to our channel partners trying to use our technology platform and what some of their problems were in terms of integrating with their own. So it gave me insight that I used until my last day there, and allowed me to do trainings for my team and that entire staff, senior staff that I hired into finance. I was able to train with the same information that the customers did. And what I'll tell you is that doing the training with sales, getting to understand the customer and the channel, and then forcing that same type of understanding on my team made a huge difference to the ways that those two teams worked together. Their ability to understand each other's needs, constraints, and also just where everybody was coming from. So I highly recommend that.
Great story. I want to take a step back and zoom out from your specific experience to perhaps more CFO in general in terms of the path and the qualifications, etc. Would you say your path is a typical one, or are there different ways of entry?
There are definitely different, there are certainly different ways of entering the CFO seat. My path is absolutely not typical for a number of reasons. I had gone into public and private and nonprofit organizations, and it's very rare to see people going back and forth between those sectors. I personally think that it's a wonderful thing, and I encourage more people to consider doing that. It's not typical because I had taken 4 years to go into the accounting. Okay. CFOs can either go into the CFO suite by rising up through accounting to being an assistant controller, controller, chief accounting officer, and then CFO. That's more of a compliance-based CFO who's really typically for public companies and for business that already exists and is sort of churning regularly. Yeah. The other path, which is by far, I think, more popular, is an MBA who has a background in strategy, some background in operations, etc., who's able to really be that thought partner to the CEO. That's typically what the CEOs are looking for, someone who can understand their business. The CEO wants to tell you what they want, and then they want you to take care of all of that. And that is as it should be. CEO should not care about how I do my monthly close. They should just know what the date is. And if I'm not going to meet that timeline, I need to be able to tell them way in advance that there's going to be some sort of a hiccup, and I need to be able to explain why. But they don't need to see the making of the sausage. So there's a mismatch there because oftentimes the people who come in from the strategy side do not have the background that it takes to close the books, issue your earnings reports, or be able to tell you about disclosures or requirements that you need to be familiar with as you're doing revenue recognition or something like that. So I would encourage people, again, anybody who's thinking of doing the CFO path, I would encourage them to have strategy, FP&A, and accounting experience in some way, shape, or form. I took the time to get all three of those, and in addition to that, I did IT, facilities, and HR, and worked very, very closely with legal. I think those are the parts where you need to have the secondary experience, and then you need a proven track record of being able to work collaboratively, both with sales, absolutely with sales and business development, and absolutely with R&D. You have to be familiar with what, as a CFO, you need to know what's going on in your pipeline, you need to be able to see how that's trending, and you need to know what's happening in R&D. Not only so that you can capitalize it, but so that you could talk about the trends and what happens when something goes live and what happens with your earnings.
So we've talked a lot about how you, the going in, how you can enter. What about, what's beyond the CFO? If you went down this path, are you stuck there, or do you have different options?
Let me answer the first question first, which is what's after CFO?
Yeah.
And the answer is you could do anything. What's interesting is people who become CFOs tend to stay CFOs and do it for a variety of different companies over and over again. I'll tell you, that's certainly my intention. I love the role. It's exactly the right fit for me. And I don't have a desire to be a CEO. I personally think that people who tend to be CEO are the people who come from the sales function, which is where I say that you have to work very closely with sales. I tend to find that most successful CEOs come in and really understand outwardly what does the market need, what is the channel, what do our customers need, and how do we actually get the partnerships that we need to propel the business forward, and then they give it to the CFO and say, here. Or the COO if you're large enough, and they say execute on it. But from the CFO position, if you have the desire, you can absolutely become CEO. In fact, during corporate transitions, the person who tends to be the interim CEO is oftentimes the CFO. So, but that tends to be, okay, the CEO is leaving, CFO becomes interim CEO, and then you hire a new CEO. But you could become, from CFO, you could become CEO, you could become COO, you could become president, or the other thing that many CFOs tend to do is to go and become an investor. So you go, now that you understand everything that it takes to actually run the organization, the metrics, the dashboards, the growth, and you can call untruths when you see them. Many people then choose to go, whether become a VC or work for a VC company or a private equity or some sort of an investment management company.
It's been delightful. Thank you
pleasure.
very much, and I would be curious to find out where you go next.
Me too. Thanks for having me.